Back on Golf Today, time now for Meet the Press as we welcome in our colleague Ryan Lavner and Golf Digest senior writer Joel Beall. Eamon, where do you want to go off the top?
I want to take Joel to one of the storylines of last week, and it was in its own way so predictable, which Joel had a great column in Golf Digest arguing that the Michael Block story took a predictable arc from folk hero to a lot of people telling him to hit the road. Joel, why did you think that story moved in such a predictable way during the course of the week?
See y'all later. Thanks.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting that last night you had two popular TV shows in Succession and Barry, and both those series did something that's increasingly rare, which is knowing when to pull the plug. The sights, sounds, memories that Block provided at Oak Hill were indelible, but instead of appreciating it for what that week was, trying to carry that magic over for a second straight week, I think was just a mistake. Certainly the media were guilty of trying to milk Block for all it's worth, and I think there was a degree of overexposure to the fans. They got a little tired of it. I think Block's persona didn't quite help. Listen, he's not afraid to ham it up, which I think was liked at the PGA. Most golfers rarely emote, and in Block, fans had somebody that looked like he was having the time of his life and wasn't afraid to show it. But there's a difference between doing that at a major championship to those same theatrics when you're struggling to break 80 at just a regular tour event. Those comments he made about Rory and distance and having a world-class short game, that didn't help. Personally, I think it's exactly that type of conviction and self-belief you need in yourself to compete against the world's best. But those comments actually weren't that copacetic with this everyman character we were also sold. But honestly, the biggest mistake was in playing so soon after Oak Hill was just a chance to pull the rug out from something that he had built the week before. Because at the heart of this story is just a club pro competing against the best golfers in the world, and by going out and shooting what he shot at Colonial, he risked becoming a story that was celebrated. Now became a bit of a sideshow.
Lav, what do you think? Because it seemed like 1 minute the golf Twitterati was building him up, and then that same group was tearing him down 5 minutes later.
Yeah, honestly, I don't really blame Michael Block at all. He had to maximize his opportunity. This was obviously going to be a short-term deal. I think he did something upwards of 30 media interviews between the final round of the PGA Championship and then when he met the press at Colonial. It's smart if it's your part. He got an agent. He's got a sponsorship deal now. He has to do everything he can to kind of maximize the limited opportunity that he had. I think this is really more where the modern media is going, and it's a byproduct of the system that we have now. We have a system where we're rewarded with likes and views and comments and engagement, and that also risks the athlete being overexposed and oversaturated. And that's where I think some of the backlash came from. So it was the perfect storm of a guy who clearly enjoyed the spotlight and wanted to maximize his opportunity. I also think it was a byproduct of the modern media age where we're so quick to jump on a story and then apparently just as quick to kind of tear down the pry as well.
Ryan, speaking of someone looking for likes and engagements and proving themselves quite good at it, Phil Mickelson seems to be picking fights left, right and centre on social media these days, particularly with Brandel Chambly. Are you surprised in any way at the belligerence that he's got going out there right now, or do you think it's all part of the marketing of LIV right now?
I think it's probably part of the marketing, and I've stopped trying to understand what Phil Mickelson's motives would be when he engages with the outside world. I don't know if he's bored, starved for attention, which I certainly think is a big one. He could be deflecting, particularly with the Billy Walters book upcoming. He could be trying to appease some of his bosses. He seems to be selling himself as someone who is very much trying to engage in the greater good and helping out his teammates or his fellow LIV mates. I think there's ample evidence over the past quarter century that he is really just in it for himself. And so I'm done guessing what his motives are. But I think he's also proven over the past year that he's kind of a duplicitous character. And I think everyone needs to be a little bit careful with what he says.
Joel, speaking of duplicitous, I got an email from a source saying that the LIV is in the throes of a death rattle and that this will be, the plug will be pulled in 2025, that MBS isn't happy. He was sold that this would be something to bring the sports world together. Then SI has a story saying, no, LIV is digging in and looking for tournament sites around the world. What are we going to be talking about in 2025 as pertains to LIV Golf?
Good question. Obviously they made news past couple of days by announcing they're bringing on the YouTube stream back for pay-per-view. option. But listen, if you're operating from the premise that LIV Golf is a business entity, which it's a debatable premise in itself, but the two serious revenue generators were supposed to be a media deal and franchise ownership and sponsorship. The agreement that LIV struck with the CW network, I think, can generally be described as mixed. Obviously, rather than a traditional rights fee exchange, the CW and LIV are splitting ad revenue. Who knows for how much, but just for context, the PGA Tour is believed to be pulling in somewhere between $700 million a year through their media rights deal. However, at least the CW gave LIV a traditional platform to reach an audience, and that was important in trying to get some type of entities or individuals to financially back their teams. That is, everyone around LIV Golf has said that is how their business model is ultimately going to work, is sponsorship and ownership. And we're halfway into year 2, and that just hasn't come to fruition. So if that's really the hurdle LIV is facing, I can understand the worries about 2025, 2026, and this thing no longer being around.
Brian, based on what Joel just summarised as the current state of play with LIV, do you see a pathway imminently to some kind of audience traction?
In the U.S., it's hard to see. I think internationally, the LIV Adelaide event was so successful because LIV took their tour to an area that was starved for attention and starved for high-class golf. And so I think if you're LIV executive, that needs to be the model going forward. You need to be targeting those types of areas. Short term, it's hard to see how the American golf audience is going to latch onto this. Long term, I do think there is potential. You know, free agency is huge in other sports, and LIV seems to be kind of buying in that model as well. The franchise model, kind of having these captains and these owners kind of have home courses. Like, I think all of that is intriguing, but it's so far down the road. Like, we're talking a decade plus. And to Joel's point, you know, if the short term is not delivering the profit that the Saudi backers wanted to, they may have no choice but to pull the plug before this thing could actually come to fruition and have kind of the long-term model fully realized.
Joel, over on the PGA Tour, Jack's hosting the Memorial this week. He's been somewhat vocal on a lot of issues, but particularly this idea of having no-cut events, which are supposedly going to be what the designated events on the PGA Tour are in 2024. Tiger's made similar noises about the Genesis Invitational. If you're a betting man, how do you think this plays out? Because those are two pretty powerful voices on this subject.
Yeah, certainly anytime Jack and Tiger talk, and if they're talking the same language, you should listen. Unfortunately, it does seem like the money's going to play out here, and no-cut element is a business initiative. You're guaranteed to see a star for 4 straight days, which is, if you're sponsoring one of these tournaments, that's what you want to have guaranteed. The problem is, I think one of the beauties of the PGA Tour and just golf is its meritocracy. Stripping the cut basically weakens the very thing that gives what's on the line meaning. I think it was interesting, too. It's a bit of a self-owned by the Tour, because one of their biggest assets in their battle with LIV is that LIV can come across as an exhibition. By doing away with the cut, the Tour is jeopardizing, even if it's just from an optics standpoint, looking like the very thing they're trying to ridicule. So I understand there's events that already have no cuts, and it will likely just be a handful of more that fall into this category. But if Jack and Tiger are saying these designated events are the events that are supposed to matter, there needs to be consequences, and I think that's why the cut is so imperative to have at these events.
Lav, on that note, is the PGA Tour getting what it wants out of this new era of designated events versus non? We had the nice Chris Kirk, Eric Cole story. Emiliano Grillo wins for the first time in nearly 8 years. Are you liking, as a journalist, what you are seeing in this new-look PGA Tour?
Oh, Damon, I don't think this could be described as anything other than a resounding success in 2023. And I actually think the potential is there for next year to be even better when you have the cadence of non-designated events leading into designated events. Players can alter the trajectory of their career. I think that's very interesting. I completely agree with Joel's point that this could be a potential own goal by the PGA Tour. I mean, Tiger and Jack know what the fans know, and that the 36-hole cut brings finality, it brings intensity, it brings drama. I understand from a business perspective why you'd want your stars to be there for all 4 days, but having Rory McIlroy kind of listless in T42 doesn't really do anyone any good. I'm not sure why there can't be a mix of designated events that don't have a cut, as well as some of the kind of player-hosted invitationals that could have a cut. I think it's all about how the Friday telecast could be presented. Right now, if you go to a PGA Tour event, you're there for all 4 days. Like, Friday doesn't really have an identity other than the cut. And so I think it could actually go further if the way that it's presented on television was better and focus on that cut line as opposed to some of the players who are trying to get in position for the weekend. I think it's all about how it's delivered, and I believe that was a miss by the PGA Tour.
Got to have some juice on Friday. A lot of questions still to be answered. Lav and Joel, thank you very much, gentlemen.